Chapter 25. It was just past dawn when Daisy stirred, the cottage wrapped in the early strivings of spring. The fire had burned low overnight, and the air held a faint chill. Pete was in the kitchen, humming as he prepared tea, the sound drifting gently through the rooms like a familiar lullaby. Daisy sat up slowly, her body heavy with sleep and the weight of nearing motherhood. She reached for the blanket, then paused. Something shifted inside her. A deep, low pressure. Not pain, not yet. But something different, something final. She breathed in, steadying herself, and wiggled her legs over her side of the mattress. Her feet touched the rug, and then a sharp, unmistakable tightening gripped her belly. She gasped, one hand flying to the bedpost, the other to her stomach. The room tilted slightly, not from dizziness but from the sudden clarity of what was happening. "Pete," she called, her voice low but urgent. He was beside her in seconds, tea forgotten, eyes wide and steady. "What is it?" She looked up at him, her face pale but calm. "I think it's time." Pete knelt before her, his hands already reaching to support her. "All right," he said, voice gentle but firm. "Let's get you comfortable. I'll send word to Aunt Ellie." Daisy nodded, gripping his shoulder. Another wave came, stronger now, more insistent. Her breath hitched, but she didn't panic. It was there. The cottage was warm. The world was ready. As he helped her back into bed, propping pillows behind her and brushing her hair from her forehead, Daisy felt the first flicker of fear give way to something else. Resolve. This was the moment everything changed. And she was not alone. Pete would be here with her. And so would Aunt Eleonora, and Uncle William, and the midwife, and if not in body, the entire side of Pete's friendship circle and well-wishers in the parish. By the time Aunt Eleonora arrived, the midwife was bustling about, and Pete was trying to be useful, his earnest attempts making Daisy laugh despite the rolling waves of pain that kept building relentlessly. Inside the bedroom, the lanterns had been lit, casting a golden glow over the quilt and the basin of warm water. Eleonora moved with practiced grace, her sleeves rolled up, her voice low and soothing. The midwife, a woman with gentle hands and a firm tone, was at Daisy's side, checking, preparing, murmuring encouragement. Daisy lay propped against a fortress of pillows, her breath coming in waves. Her hair clung to her forehead, damp with sweat, and her fingers gripped the edge of the blanket with quiet determination. "You're doing beautifully, darling," Eleonora whispered, brushing Daisy's hair back. "Just breathe. You're nearly there." Outside the bedroom door, Pete paced the hallway. His coat had been discarded, his sleeves rolled up, and his brow furrowed with helpless worry. Reverend Howells stood nearby, calm as ever, a hand resting lightly on Pete's shoulder. "She's strong," the Reverend said. "She'll come through, and so will the child." Pete nodded but didn't stop pacing. "I know. She's in there, and I'm out here. That's how it begins," Reverend Howells said quietly. "You wait, you worry, and then you love." Daisy's cry rang out from the bedroom, not of pain, but of effort. Pete froze. His hand reached for the door, then dropped. He looked at a reverend, who simply nodded once. Inside, Daisy was trembling, her body bearing down, her voice low and raw. The midwife leaned in. "One more push, love, just one." Daisy gritted her teeth, her eyes locked on Aunt Eleonora's. "I can do this," she whispered. "You already are," Eleonora said, and then, like a miracle, the room shifted, a deep grunt, a pause, and the unmistakable sound of a baby's first cry, sharp and clear, and full of life. Pete burst through the door, eyes wide, breath caught. Daisy looked up at him, exhausted but radiant. Eleonora cradled a tiny, wrinkled bundle wrapped in a soft towel. "It's a girl," she said, tears in her eyes. Pete crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling beside Daisy, his hand trembling as he touched her cheek. Eleonora laid the infant into Daisy's waiting arms. "She's perfect," Pete whispered in awe. Daisy smiled. her voice barely audible. "She's ours, Pete." And in that moment, surrounded by warmth, by love, by the quiet miracle of new life, Pete and Daisy became something more than husband and wife. They became a family. Chapter 26. Time moved slowly now. Like honey poured from a spoon, the days blurred together in soft rhythms, feeding, resting, whispering lullabies into the quiet. Daisy was learning to breastfeed, her body aching and miraculous all at once. Each morning, the midwife arrived just after Pete left for the seminary, her boots dusted with frost and her voice brisk but kind. She checked Daisy's healing, weighed the baby, and offered gentle encouragement. "You're doing beautifully," she said almost every day. "She's thriving." Daisy felt like she was living inside a bubble, warm, suspended, untouched by the outside world. In the afternoons, Aunt Eleonora would arrive with fresh bread, folded laundry, and the latest paper. She'd settle Daisy into the armchair by the fire, cradle the baby while Daisy napped, and hum old hymns under her breath. Pete had started coming home earlier, his boots crunching on the path just as the sun dipped low. He'd kiss Daisy's forehead, scoop up their daughter, and sit with them by the fire, his voice low and full of wonder. Daisy felt loved, cared for, held. One quiet evening, as wind whispered against the windows and the baby slept between them, Daisy wrote to Petunia. She described the birth, the first cry, the way Pete had looked at their daughter like she was made of starlight. She promised to send a sketch soon and asked Petunia to write back sooner. About a week after the baby's arrival, Daisy and Pete sat together in bed, the lantern casting a soft glow across the quilt, and the conversation turned. "What shall we call her then?" Pete asked, his voice gentle. "Ellen," Daisy said without hesitation. Pete smiled. "After Aunt Ellie?" Daisy shook her head. "No, after Ellen McTeer." Pete's brow furrowed slightly. Daisy looked down at the sleeping baby, her fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. "She was a girl from our parish," Daisy said quietly. "She disappeared in the middle of the night with her family. No one ever spoke of it openly, but the gossip was vile. I knew she was in the same boat I later found myself in as well, and I never spoke up for her. I should have." Pete reached for Daisy, his arms wrapping around her with all the gentleness in the world. "You're speaking for her now," he said. "You're giving her name to someone who will be loved every day of her life." Daisy nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "Ellen," she whispered again. Pete kissed her temple, gentle, wiping her tears. "Ellen Weston," he said softly. "She'll carry it with grace." And in the hush of the night, with love wrapped around them and the fire burning low, their daughter was named. 2 months after Ellen's birth, Daisy and Pete were ready to present their daughter for baptism. The church was bathed in morning light, soft and golden through the stained glass. The pews were filled with familiar faces, those who had walked beside Daisy and Pete through the quiet months of waiting and the miracle of birth. Fred, Pete's close friend, arrived with his entire family this time. Their 2 little boys and younger sister kept the parents thoroughly preoccupied, expending most of their energy on gently containing the children's considerably greater energy. Stephen arrived late, with a young woman in tow, earning him a wink from Pete. His colleagues from the seminary sat near the aisle, nodding warmly. Daisy's new friend Martha and her husband waved from the second row. Aunt Eleonora, radiant in a plum-colored shawl, leaned over to whisper to Daisy as they settled in. "Darling and darling too," she whispered, smiling at both mother and child. Reverend Howells stood at the altar, his robes crisp, his expression solemn but kind. The font had been polished to a shine, and a small bouquet of winter roses sat beside it, their pale petals a quiet echo of the season. Pete stood proudly next to Daisy, holding baby Ellen like she was the most precious cargo in the world. His arms were steady, his eyes bright. Daisy glanced at him and felt her heart swell. She knew, without question, that Ellen would be loved every single day of her life, in a house where mornings began with humming and prayers were spoken not in repentance, but in gratitude. The ceremony began. Reverend Howells spoke of grace, of new beginnings, of the sacredness of naming. When he asked for the child's name, Pete's voice rang clear, Ellen Petunia. Daisy watched as water touched her daughter's brow, as blessings were spoken, as the congregation murmured their amens. She felt like she was glowing from the inside out. In the front pew, Mr. and Mrs. Weston sat quietly. Mrs. Weston's posture remained aggrieved, but her eyes betrayed her, following little Ellen with a longing and a softness Daisy could never have imagined. It was a look that spoke of once coolness now pierced by something tender. And then, after the service, when Pete carried their daughter down the aisle, the change was complete. His mother reached out without hesitation, arms open, voice trembling with gentleness. "Come here, my little one," she whispered, her tone warm as sunlight breaking through clouds. "Come to Grandma." It hadn't always been this way. A few days after Ellen's birth, Mrs. Weston had appeared unannounced, her expression cool, her voice clipped. She offered a dry sniff, set a small parcel on the table, and left without lingering. 2 days later, she returned with a gift, a silver rattle, polished and gleaming like a token of duty. The next day, a knitted outfit in pale pink, its stitches neat and careful. And then, almost without explanation, the visits continued. Every other day, the sound of her carriage wheels on the gravel, her figure at the door, less angry, less distant. She was still cool toward Daisy, yes, her words measured, her tone reserved. But with Ellen, everything softened. She cooed gently, her voice warm in a way Daisy had never heard before. She held the baby with a tenderness that seemed to surprise even herself, lingering longer each time, as if reluctant to let go. Each visit stretched a little further into the afternoon, and with it, the rigid lines of Mrs. Weston's posture began to ease. Slowly, like frost melting under the sun. Now, watching Mrs. Weston cradle Ellen with surprising tenderness, Daisy felt that truth settle in her heart. The older woman's hands, once so formal and precise, curved gently around the child as if she was holding something fragile and precious. Her voice, cool for so long, had warmed into soft murmurs that brushed against the quiet like a blessing. And in that moment, Daisy felt something shift inside her, a loosening of old knots, a quiet surrender. If she can love my child, Daisy thought, that will be enough for me. Enough to bridge the distance, enough to lay down the weight of past grievances. Because love, even borrowed through the arms of another, was still love. After the service, the guests gathered in the church hall for tea and cake. Laughter echoed, and Ellen slept peacefully in Pete's arms. Daisy stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his back. She felt like she was bursting with contentment. Almost. There was just one thing still missing from her relationship with Pete. One quiet, unspoken thing. And she intended to rectify it at the very first opportunity. Chapter 27. That night, their cottage was steeped in stillness, the kind that only came after a day well lived. Outside, the smell and signs of spring whispered of new beginnings, mirroring the fresh start unfolding inside their cottage. 2-month-old Ellen slept peacefully in her cot, fed, burped, and swaddled in soft flannel. Her tiny breaths rose and fell in rhythm, a lullaby of life. Daisy stood at the wash basin brushing her hair slowly, her nightdress soft against her skin. She caught herself humming, a hymn, gentle and familiar. She paused, smiling. It was Pete's habit, one she picked up without noticing. It made her feel close to him, even when he was in the next room, scribbling notes for Sunday's sermon in his meticulous script. She lit the lantern by their bedside, its glow casting a golden warmth across the quilt. The room felt dreamlike, suspended in quiet anticipation. She turned down the sheet, her heart fluttering, not with nerves, but with something deeper. Readiness. Pete entered a few minutes later, his notebook tucked under his arm, his eyes tired but bright. He paused when he saw her, really saw her, and something shifted in the air between them. Daisy sat up slightly, her gaze steady and full of promise. She recognized the look in his eyes, the way they softened and sparked all at once. She sent a quick prayer of gratitude for this lovely, easygoing man who had claimed her heart, and now, hopefully, her body. Pete crossed the room slowly, setting his notebook on the table. "You're humming," he said, his voice low. "I know," Daisy replied, smiling. Into his eyes, "I think I caught it from you." He chuckled, then sat beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You catch all the best things." Daisy reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Pete," she said softly, "I think I'm ready." He didn't speak right away. He simply looked at her, and then leaned in, pressing his forehead gently to hers. "Me too," he whispered. And in the quiet, with their daughter sleeping nearby, and the lantern casting soft shadows, Daisy took the first step toward something new. Not rushed, not dramatic, but a deepening of what had already begun. Love unfolding. The end.